And welcome to the reality show. Today I've got Jonathan and Marco and Richard with me. How's it going, everybody?
Very well, thank
Good,
you.
thank you.
Fantastic. So today our main topic is going to be the pending operation in Rafah and what Israel has had to say around the deadline for action there and what Hamas has also been demanding in response. We're also primarily going to focus on this vote that's just gone on in the UN and some of the long-term ramifications of that. And then as a secondary topic, should we have time, we're going to be talking a bit about anti-Semitism and how we should think about that in relation to free speech, because that's something which I'm seeing people still talking about in a way that's just as confused as it was in the first week after October 7th. And there's a couple of kind of recent incidents of anti-Semitic behavior which have gone on, and if we have time to talk about this, we'll reflect on the idea of free speech in relation to these things. But so let's get started. So this vote that's just been held by the UN Security Council, I'm sure some people have been watching the Daily Objective. They will have just seen James and Daniel speaking about it. We're not going to be focusing on the main bit of the vote itself, but very quickly, did you guys see that? What did you make of it, Mark and Richard?
It was quite a powerful statement from the Israeli ambassador, and we're actually talking off camera with Jonathan. I was just wondering how much actually the UN are able to understand the meaning of the words he spoke. It made eminently sense. It was really, really true what he said, but that bunch of I better not use the word. I'm not going to be receptive to words like this. They're just too up their own backside.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we're talking here about the Algerian resolution put before the Security Council, where the US vetoed it, the UK abstained, as the UK is wont to do, and the rest voted for it. It's when you look at the wording of the Israeli ambassador and you hear what he said, it was absolutely packed with the principled thinking that we've been extracting on all of these shows over the last 3 months. It's as if you'd summarize them all, brought together the key points, and summarize them within a 15-minute speech. And that's good to see. But as Marco says, whether that holds any weight, whether that cuts through at all. Interesting that within it there was also some calls to emotion as part of it, in the sense that he referred to specific hostages by name, certain babies but by name, in an attempt to counter the fact that that is always done on the other side. Now, were that the only technique, that wouldn't be, particularly commendable. But in the context of concentrating all on the principles and then using that as a particular example to emphasize what terrorism is going on and what the causes are for people, I think that it was a good thing to do.
Yeah, Jonathan, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and the speech was very moving, very emotional, very powerful. But I also hope that it's actual policy, that what the Israel government is actually thinking, because the words are pretty perfect. We couldn't. I'm not sure we could have said it better in majority of it. But I hope it echoes in Israel, and it seems that it does. Surprisingly, it seems that it does. So far. I would like to emphasize that Britain abstained. I think it should be emphasized. I think it's a disgrace. Also, France, right? France is also in that Security Council. France voted yes. That's correct me if I'm wrong. So much for our great allies, Britain and France. So that should be, I think, emphasized. And what else on the UN? Yeah, it's they want to reward Hamas and punish Israel. They want the ceasefire will only reward Hamas. There's nothing Israel has to gain from a ceasefire. The hostages won't go back. We won't win. We just give time for Hamas to prepare for a counterattack, for defense, for whatever. So that we have nothing to gain from it. So this is unequivocally an anti-Israel resolution, and France supported that, and Britain abstained. That should be emphasized, I think.
Yes, unfortunately, the UK has a rather bad history on these kind of things, which maybe we'll talk a bit about. But on the Israeli ambassador, it was interesting that they they called him to speak just after they called the permanent observer for Palestine to speak. I presume he's someone who's taken from the PLO, I think. And he's the permanent observer, I take it, because this is the Security Council and Palestine's not on the Security Council, but this is the guy who's called in. And he very much, you were speaking, Richard, about appeals to emotion. Very much the Palestinian permanent observer speech was laden with calls to emotion and the typical kind of smears that are alleged against Israel, that it's a colonizing power, that it's committing genocide and all these kind of things. And the Israeli ambassador, I'm always really impressed by that guy. I always forget his name once we come on the show.
Gilad Erdan.
There we go. His speech on Holocaust Memorial Day as well was really, really good. So he does very, very well. And in relation to, I guess, one of our kind of pet topics on the channel, UNRWA, he was very, very good and said, in Gaza, UNRWA, the UN is Hamas and Hamas is UNRWA or something like that. He said, I thought that was very, very good.
Pointed out UNRWA is itself a terror organization because it covers up for terror organizations with some of the stuff that we've been talking about, including the data center underneath the UNRWA headquarters and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing I didn't like from the speech, they actually mentioned the fact that the ICJ stopped short of asking for ceasefire. And that, in my view, was effectively using something positive, which ends up giving credit and weight to the ICJ itself. So the whole case should have been really ignored as a farce, and doing that effectively gives it a bit of gravitas, which is a mistake, I think.
I guess so. Although I guess that's already been done many times over, in a sense, by the Israeli government. But let's set some more of the context for people. So, I mean, I'm sure as they can't have escaped from seeing it in the news, but this is surrounding the pending operation in Rafah. And we've seen, so what we've seen from the Israeli government is a statement saying that they will hold off on this pending operation until, I think it's the 10th of March, which is supposed to be the beginning of Ramadan. And if all the hostages are released in that time, then they won't do it, as I understand it. And Hamas has offered a kind of counter offer, I guess, saying that if the Israelis withdraw completely from Gaza and cease all hostilities, then they will release the hostages in a statement which sounds completely convincing. What do you think about this as a kind of state of affairs? Do you think this is wise for the Israeli government to do, to hold off in this way? Because I think, thinking about it over the last sort of day or so, it seems I'm a bit torn about it. So what do you guys think? Mark and Richard, what do you think?
I think it's pretty much disgraceful, to be honest. I think it's a massive mistake.
Mhm.
They're trying to appease the whole Muslim world by, looking like those that respect religion so much. By doing that, you effectively you're debasing yourself to a level of cattle traders. You're talking about human lives. You're talking about innocent people who were taken from their homes, and they are currently kept hostage by the people in Rafah at this point. So why would you do that? Just go in with as much force as you can and free them if you can, or flatten out Hamas. There's no doubt now that if there are any surviving hostages, they're probably kept in Rafah by people in Rafah, by the so-called people that we're supposed to be so sorry about. Accepting this kind of human trade is quite reprehensible, and it's quite repellent, really.
Yeah, I can speculate as to what some of the reasons might be. If I try and pull out some of the better ones, perhaps, as to why they want to delay it to the start of Ramadan on the 10th of March. I think possibly you could argue that that's to make sure that the message gets out loud and clear to every Palestinian in the territory. They understand when Ramadan starts. That's something they don't need to retain any information for other than by Ramadan. And if you're going to see any kind of uprising against Hamas from within Gaza itself by the Palestinian people, you want them to know that when that deadline is and how soon it is, and that and what follows thereafter is going to be firm and thorough, and you've got a tiny window in which to act. And you've seen what's happened in the north of the country, and you will see the same in the south unless you relinquish the hostages and hand over the Hamas terrorists. So that's a possible reason. There's also obviously the cowardice, the pressure from the US, all the other reasons that always cause delay, and whether Netanyahu is trying to hold together the support within his own country to enable him to go that final step in Rafah. But the key element is that the Hamas brigade in Rafah are still there; they're still strong, and Hamas will still exist without this. So there is no victory without wiping out Hamas, and this is the region where they are.
Yes, and Jonathan, so what's your impression of how people are speaking about the operation in Rafah in Israel? But then what do you think about this this delay until the 10th of March?
Yeah, so I'll start with the delay. I completely agree with what Marco and Richard have said here. I think it's a moral disgrace what we're doing here. Now, if there's a secret military reason behind that, we don't have enough ammunition, I don't know, something like that, I can get that. But there is no reason for us to continue the suffering of our population, the people who are displaced from their homes, the tens of thousands of soldiers were there, in Gaza, in the north. There's no reason to continue their suffering for the sake of our enemies, of the Palestinian people. There's no moral reason that Israel should do that. So from that aspect, it's a disgrace. Also, respecting Ramadan or trying to understand the complexity of Ramadan or whatever, I think is also a moral abomination, because the fact is that they attacked us on our holiday. They attacked on a Jewish holiday. They attacked on Shmini Atzeret. So there's no reason for us to be nice to them. There's no reason for us to tell them they don't need to know how many days. Is it 20 days in advance before we attack? We need to tell them exactly where we're going to attack, and they should go there. And there's no reason for all that courtesy. They didn't have any courtesy, any moral courtesy towards the people of Be'eri, the people of Faraza, the people of the Nova party. So there's absolutely no justification for that on any moral level. So in that sense, I think it's a crime what they're doing. The Netanyahu government, the generals, whoever is behind this, and they should be prosecuted for that. I'm serious about that. So what was the other aspect? What are people thinking about it, Morgan?
Yes.
So there's global hysteria. We're seeing it right now. There's hysteria from everyone. I even read on the news that Prince Williams is concerned. So we should be very. So we have now reached a very intense point. And I think it's good that there is all that hysteria, because it shows that we are in the right direction. It shows that Israel is in the right direction. If we just push towards Rafah and we've conquered that, and that's it, we're done, we've captured all the strongholds, that's where we win. So that's why you see global hysteria. That's why you see people, all of our biggest friends, the US, the UK, all of our greatest allies calling us to stop. We have to ceasefire now. The people of Gaza, humanitarian crisis, the Ramadan, they can come up with thousands of excuses. But the real problem they have is that Israel is going to win if we capture Rafah, and that's the biggest problem. Not the Ramadan, not anything like that. And another side note that as I've been growing up in Israel, I know what Ramadan means for us Israelis. Ramadan is a month where more Jews are killed. Is a month where more Muslim Islamic fundamentalists are bloodthirsty because they are hungry or because they are fasting or whatever. So we have to be more careful on Ramadan. We've always been told that. We've always been you should stay out of public spaces on Ramadan. There might be terrorist bombing. So we shouldn't worry so much about Ramadan. We should be strong. We should be confident in our ability to protect ourselves and not show weakness. There's another thing on Ramadan which is important. I don't think we would have covered it. Is what's happening on Mount Temple. Do you want to get into that, Morgan, later, or did you hear about that?
I haven't heard about that. So do you want to introduce that for us and then?
Yes, so there is in Ramadan a lot of people go to pray in Mount Temple, which is the most sensitive point in the Middle East in Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque,
Mhm.
and there has been a decision by our minister Ben-Gvir to limit the number of Muslims that can enter the mosque, and that is causing huge outcry inside Israel, calling him a Firoman. Is that a saying in English? A person who wants to cause fire
Mhm.
and said he wants to set up the Middle East in fire. And so there's also hysteria about that, and that's because of security. We want to limit them because we're afraid that they'll do, what they tend to do up there. So that's also tied to Ramadan. So there's a lot of hysteria from everyone, and I think it's good. I think it shows that we're in the right direction.
And just on the Ramadan point, I mean, so maybe I'm misunderstanding it. I took the delay. This isn't something I've heard people say, but this was just my impression, I guess. I took the delay until Ramadan because they delay it until the start of Ramadan, right? I thought so. Then the attack would coincide with the holiday, not skip it, which is what I think you said, Jonathan. Is that right?
Yes, they said that the attack will start on the day of Ramadan, and they should be scared of that, and that's why we want them to. We shouldn't be considerate. That's what I'm saying. We shouldn't be considerate
Okay.
of we shouldn't care. We should let them know, hey guys, we're going to attack you on the holiday. You should give us our children back.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean.
Oh, sure. Okay. And then just on the how people are reacting to it point, how are people reacting specifically to the idea of the delay? Do people seem annoyed by that, or are they in favor of it?
Fortunately, not as much as I would love to. The media are hysterical in Israel about Rafah. You have all the experts now explaining how it's impossible, how it's, you have 2 million people there. How can you do it? It's impossible. We're going to lose. So a lot of that, and that's very concerning. But one cause for optimism is the fact that paradoxically, Netanyahu seems to be quite principled on this matter, and he's saying we're going to push. We're going to go to capture Rafah no matter what. We're going to win, which I think is good because the opposition is saying we need to surrender. We need to make a deal. We need to, have a ceasefire. They'll never agree to what the UN wants us to do, but they are also much more lenient towards us negotiating with our murderers. So that's the discussion now. What you'll see on the news, a lot of experts warning us of the catastrophe that is awaiting us in Rafah and in the international front as well. They are warning us of what the US will stop supporting us, the UK was, which might be true, but hysteria.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. And then so then we also have this Hamas offer, and in response, maybe it came out first actually, but which is saying that if the IDF completely withdraws, and the Israelis stop their hostilities, quote unquote, then they'll release all the hostages. Which I think, as I kind of suggested, that I don't think that's a convincing offer at all. I don't know if anyone's persuaded by that. I don't think they're saying it thinking that anyone's going to be persuaded by that. I really, I would like to say I have some kind of insight. Actually, maybe I don't know if I'd like to have some insight into the minds of how the Hamas leaders are thinking about this, but
Morgan, I thank them for that. I think that doing us a fantastic service, Hamas, in this regard. And it seems illogical. It doesn't make sense, right? Why would they have such preposterous demands? It makes me think of the Bible, actually, of Pharaoh, where he is refusing to let the people go, no matter how things are terrible in Egypt. You have all the terrible things happening in Egypt with the frogs and everything. But for some reason, Pharaoh is tenacious. I'm not gonna let the people, the Israelis go, and then it actually worked better for us. So hopefully we can emulate that story from the Bible.
mm. Um, so then Marco and Richard, so well, let's just maybe return or wind back the clock a sec because we were talking about the UK's not been not been very good on this and abstained from the vote. And we're kind of getting mixed signaling about this as well. What's your gauge of how people feel here? Because I was just asking Jonathan how people feel in Israel. Because I'm actually not too sure because I wonder sometimes whether I'm kind of stuck in viewing the kind of marches which are going on through London or something, and therefore thinking the majority of the UK seems to be kind of anti-Israel and doesn't want them to go into Rafah. What so, but I'm not sure. So what's your gauge? Do you think people here view this as a terrible thing, or do you think they're more like us, even if they're not as going to be on exactly the same page?
Well, in answer to that, I think it's mixed. I think there are some fervently in the lefty Palestine anti-Israel camp. There are an enormous amount of silent people who don't want to speak at the moment and are too terrified to cast an opinion one way or the other, and would therefore rather avoid the subject and talk about eggs in the supermarket than anything else. And I do think it's interesting that in the area of London that we live in, which is a lefty area, but sort of middling in terms of incomes and stuff. It's got its nice bits as well. And when you walk around the streets, where normally you would see BLM pictures in people's windows or Ukrainian flags in people's windows, you don't see Palestinian flags. To anything like the extent that I would expect. You might see the odd Queers for Palestine or something that is in a slightly different category of specialist opinion, but yeah, I think it is different. I mean, on the point about Prince William that you referred to there. Some of that it identifies some of the problem. Today, he was at the Red Cross in London, and he was doing a satellite link with people in the Red Cross in Gaza, who are obviously giving the full humanitarian Red Cross Gaza viewpoint and he was parroting some of that when he came out again and talking about why a ceasefire is what he really wants, and he's a father and all of the emotive stuff that comes with that. But don't worry, he's balanced, because in a month's time he's apparently going to be visiting a synagogue where he's going to talk about anti-Semitism. So he's going to throw a little bone there as well afterwards down the line. But I mean, those two things just show the stupidity and the lack of thinking. But of course, people do follow what the establishment say, and they follow it from a sort of osmosis type. They take it in over time. The drip of the BBC, the surrounding of everybody decent seems to think this, and therefore that they spout it to different levels at different times. And I think this reminds me, I think Rand wrote in one particular essay, I can't remember which one, about the 3-step process that occurs with morality and with confusing the good and the evil. I think she said, I'm going to regret doing this from memory. I think in stage 1, she said that people are afraid to oppose, they fear upholding the good, and they fear opposing the evil. In stage 2, they oppose the good and they appease the evil. They start giving favors to the evil. And that morphs into the final stage, which but before they know where they are, this is a natural progression that occurs. Before you know where you are, you're actually blackening the good and you're whitewashing evil. And it feels very much that we're at that final stage here, where none of what happened on October the 7th can't be whitewashed out of existence, forgotten entirely, or just spoken away. And when the Israeli ambassador uses phrase like this is immunity for baby killers and rapists, then I think that sort of thing brings it into sharp focus.
Yes. So I mean, to make a parallel with your point, I live in an area of Edinburgh which is fairly posh, and if I look out my window now, I can see 2 Palestinian flags being flown just across the way. So it's a very lefty area. And also on the royal family, the royal family, I think they don't take political positions as such, but anything that signals weakness, they do enjoy. I think what you said there at the end, Richard, was right in the sense that something which comes up time and time again about in terms of the international community's response to this and whatever is a consistently, I think, kind of anti-justice attitude. I don't know how to think about it except nobody wants to be kind of sort of, I guess, if I think about how Rand would put this, sort of like ruthlessly demanding about what is just and insisting upon it. And so well, let's couch it this way. Even though, for example, we might not support the Israeli offers for or ceasefires or the Israeli delay here or something like that, or the Israelis warning people in a building they're about to bomb it. There's still a point that it's a kind of sign of immense generosity from the Israeli government. Now that's bad in the sense that it's misplaced and it's towards your enemy, and that in itself is a kind of anti-justice attitude. But it shows that the way that Israel is characterized by a lot of people in the international community isn't right. The idea that it's people that the Israeli army or government is going through in a kind of bloodthirsty way, it just doesn't match up to those kind of actions, does it? Um, so how how do you think the people who we're opposing here, who have this kind of anti-justice mentality, who no matter what Israel does in terms of offering kind of olive branches or anything like that, they will just oppose Israel on principle time and time again. Is there any convincing these people? I don't know. I sometimes feel like there isn't. Jonathan, how do you think about it?
Well, I wish I had more experience actually doing these long conversations with such people because I don't think I've had many such encounters because it's not very common in Israel to find such people. So I doubt that it's possible. I really doubt that because when you are marching in the street, it means that you're not only there to write, you also kind of like to march on the streets on all sorts of issues. You see that as a like you're fulfilling your life's purpose or something very, very high, very important. And people like to march. So I don't think it's just about the fact they just want to hold the flag. They want to hold something. And the trend is, to be supportive of Palestine. So I wouldn't give them that much credit that they actually have any idea what they're talking about. I hope that's the case. That's the best case scenario if they're just ignorant. If they know, then they are evil. So you wouldn't want to engage with them too much other than calling them out. You should call them out, say, your position is fundamentally evil. And if that doesn't shake them, then you shouldn't do much. More than that, I don't think you should. And and it's really disturbing that you see two Palestinian flags out of your window.
Yeah,
Seeing these flags for me, for any Israeli, it means death. It means we're after you. If an Israeli goes to this country that holds this flag, we're dead. We don't have we can't stay there. You can't own property. If a Palestinian sells property to a Jew, the Palestinian he needs to be punished by death. It's a death penalty selling property to a Jew. A Jew cannot go into Palestine. He cannot own property in Palestine. There's nothing. So this flag, a person who holds this flag it's on the same level as a person holding a Nazi flag. How would you talk to a person who holds a Nazi flag? What would you try to convince him? You just have to call him out, I think.
yes, most certainly. And literally, it's just if I turn around and look out this window just here, I can see those flags. So there you go. Mark
And
and
there's
Rich.
an area of London, sorry, I just wanted to
Yeah.
add, there's an area of London, Tower Hamlets, for example, where you will see, which is a heavily Muslim area, where you could pan a camera down a street, which will have Palestinian flags tied to the lampposts, every lamppost down the street, on the public street. You could pan that camera round and turn it to look only a few hundred yards away at the buildings of like the Gherkin and all of the towers of the City of London. So right in the shadow of the centre, the financial centre of London and the UK, you would find a public street with these flags in, because it's a Muslim area, because it's got a Muslim mayor to the whole city and a mayor to that particular area in addition to it, who isn't even Labour. He's an extreme end of the scale. But yeah, but that's the tribalism we're talking about, and that's the fear of tackling that tribalism, and that's the pussyfooting around it that goes on that's led us to this point.
That's very, very, very sad. And like I think this is like when I was in the UK in October, And saw all that, I thought, okay, that's the end of the UK. If the UK has reached that stage, if London is filled with these flags, there's no point in London. It loses all the allure, which one of my absolute favorite places in the world. When I was walking in Prague, I would give you a counterexample. I could see a lot of Israeli flags, no Palestinian flags in Prague, a lot of Ukrainian flags too. Same in Georgia, by the way. So it's not all lost yet. There are some places where people have a sense of right or wrong. The UK is in a especially low place right now, which is very, very unfortunate.
I think a lot of it is is motivated by a kind of tribalism, and I mean, and in numerous respects, but is motivated by, I guess, a kind of tribal loyalty from people who are either Muslims and feel like they need to therefore be loyal to people in Palestine, or because they're either Arabs, so it's a kind of ethnic tribalism. And woe betide us, should we ever need to into a justified war with a Muslim majority or Arab country in any way. Because I think these people then, no matter how just we may be in doing it in this imagined example, will protest and undermine us in every single way. So we are in a sorry situation. But Mark, but on this point of these people who seem to not be able to be convinced no matter what, because you made the point, Richard, about I think it was the Israeli ambassador mentioning the sexual violence and all this kind of stuff. These people aren't, because I kind of feel like if these people would be convinced by this stuff, they would have been convinced like a long time ago. In a sense, the evidence is there to see. And so I kind of despair about how do you convince these people? The answer might just be you can't, and there's just people who are in the middle who are kind of confused, and maybe you can get to them. But the kind of the hardcore, if they're ever going to change their mind, maybe it's that they would have to do that kind of legwork themselves. But do you think that's right, or do you think you can convince people? Because I think of Nikos, for example, who obviously was very far left at one point and changed his mind and was very pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel. And one of the interesting things that he has to say about that was that he knew very little about the issue. And one of the things that happened when he was changing his mind was he learned more about it. So I mean, you go ahead before I just keep waxing poetic. But so, how do you think about
it? Well, I think so many of them are at that third stage I was talking about. They're so willing to blacken good and whitewash evil that there is no cutting through to that. To be honest, you've seen occasions even when in terrorist attacks when people are very shortly thereafter, even those that have been personally affected by family members are quick to forgive and to cast reasons why this has happened, and it's not entirely the fault of the terrorist and all the baggage that they'd attached to it. So once you get to that level, those people can't be reached, to be honest. But those aren't they're not. You have to start with the vast majority in the middle, probably. Those are the people who are open to reason. I think some people have levels of reason within them, levels of response to reason, which you can tap into. And many, of course, just shift with the herd anyway. So if you shift some, you shift the rest. That's not a great way of shifting anyone. Of course, you'd like them to come along with the actual principles and understanding of the morality involved. But it starts small, but it's hard to tell. It's very hard to gauge. And one conversation with that one person at one particular time, and one person with a conversation with the same person at a different setting, when they think different ears are listening, will say something different. So again, there's a lot of cowardice involved as to what people are actually prepared to say out loud, and what they really think, really mean, and how they would really act, and how they vote on the basis of any of that when in the secrecy of the ballot box, and what options they've got open to them in the ballot box anyway, whether they're all the same. All of that comes into play.
Mm. So on Rafah, because we're in a state of limbo.
Marco, before I can say one more thing about
yeah, of course, yeah,
the flag bearing people. So I think it's important to reiterate that the flag bearing, these people who march on the streets with Palestinian flags, with whatever flags, they are irrelevant. They are a result of the philosophy. They are a result of the intellectuals, of the people who speak in the news outlets, the people who write their columns, the people who preach in universities, preach in mosques too. They are a result of that. They're a result of the philosophy of the culture. You don't need to convince everyone who's carries a flag. That's not the point. It's impossible. Also, what you need to do is to have a new critical mass of thinkers, of intellectuals who propagate the right ideas, who propagate the right metaphysics, the right epistemology, the right ethics, and that will inevitably lead them to be pro-Israel and a lot of pro-other stuff, pro-freedom, pro-capitalism, pro-reason. So I think that's the most important point to mention in this topic.
Mm. No, that's a fair point, and maybe that is the antidote to my despair. But so on Rafah, because as I was saying, we're in a kind of state of limbo at the moment. How do you guys see this going? Because I might be wrong about this, but the way that I think it's probably going to happen is this time period where the operation's pending is basically going to run out. I don't see Hamas surrendering. If the leadership is still in Rafah, there were some people speculating today that they've escaped into the Sinai Desert. I don't know whether that's true, but and the IDF probably is going to go in, and it's probably going to be very destructive, and hopefully they're able to rescue some hostages, but we'll see. What do you think the reaction of so do you think that's how it's going to go? But also, how do you think the response is going to be when that happens? Do you think, because in a sense we're getting so many warnings to Israel against doing this from all kinds of angles, and do you think they're actually going to follow through on this, or do you think this is empty, these are empty words? Jonathan, how do you think about it?
If Israel won't follow through on Rafah, it would be the defeat of Israel. And Israel cannot afford that to itself. We have hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced. We have a new generation of people who may just leave Israel because of that, because the country has failed to protect its citizens. So from that perspective, Israel has to go to Rafah. Israel has to win. Other than it won't have a future. So in that regard, we have to do it. Now, will we actually do it? The international pressure is massive, as we've mentioned today, is massive. And it was the same before also Khan Yunis, by the way. We had a lot of people warned us from going to Khan Yunis, etc. So it depends really on Netanyahu and how resilient he is and how able he is to resist all that pressure. So far, I've been surprised on how consistent he has been on that. And I think it's a lot of thanks also to our defense minister and other members of the cabinet who are pushing towards that. There are elements who are pushing against that, such as Gantz and Eisenkot. But I think the majority is pushing towards Rafah. And we really have to do it. So I really cross my fingers that we will. And I think it'll be a very positive sign that there is hope to Israel if we do that. So really, really hope that we will. And I kind of think that we will. And I also thank Hamas for being so stupid. If they were living smarter and would have more reasonable terms for their the deal, so we would have been in a different place right now. So I hope that it'll still be like that.
Marco, Richard, how do you think this is going to play out?
It's hard to tell. What I find quite worrying is that Netanyahu is saying nothing else but victory will be the acceptable. But then again, he says, "Oh, if you don't return the hostages, I will ruin your holidays." It's like, what are you on about? It feels like it's kind of buying time for some reason, and my fear is that he's buying time in order to allow diplomatic solutions to seep in. Where there needs to be this in order to allow Biden to be seen on the side of the Muslim population in the US. I don't know whether, as Jonathan suggests, it could be a military requirement. Again, we don't know this, but unless they carry on and they eradicate Hamas from Rafah, we're going to be in this situation in another couple of years. Hamas has made it quite clear they want to continue making October 7th again and again and again. So, if you don't sort it out now, if you don't sort it out now, if you don't get to the end of it, if you don't get to a decisive victory, if you don't crush the spirit or the people who actually want to destroy Israel within Gaza, Gaza is going to be a thorn in the side, and is going to make Israel existence impossible for forever.
I think there's a few things going on which indicate that there is some planning, including perhaps the area in Egypt, on the Egypt side of the border, where they seem to be fencing off a certain area. And there's obviously, they're not going to admit to it at this stage, but there are clearly some preparations for the possibility of large numbers crossing, possibly. Maybe everyone's doing something to buy some time to allow that to happen. Obviously, at the same time, the Egyptians are also responsible for allowing the border at Rafah to be such a weak border and to allow so many rockets in across the past 15 years or so. Which is what's caused the problem in the first place. And unless you take control of that entry point, unless you ensure that is a properly secure entry point, then you will see more rockets on Tel Aviv down the years, as there have been throughout. I think, but the key point is that everything done so far counts for nothing unless you finish the job, because it just it's not done, is it? Hamas is still there, and what does, as the Israeli ambassador pointed out at the UN, you're empowering terrorists everywhere if you don't stop them, and that's why we should all be hoping to see Rafah dealt with and the terrorists properly dealt with, because otherwise, in every part of the world, terrorists are going to take the attitude that if they can lose some of their numbers, but so long as they survive in a small portion, they can carry on and achieve whatever aims they can, starting from such odious, nefarious, violent acts in the first place.
One of the good parts, the many good parts in the Israeli ambassador's speech, was when he was saying that the idea of a ceasefire was the quintessential policy of kicking the can down the road. And unfortunately, that's something that people just don't seem to appreciate enough. People will talk about cycles of violence and so on and so forth, yet they don't appreciate that it's the ceasefires which allows it to be a cycle instead of a one and done kind of thing.
But ceasefire is the instrument of the UN. The UN needs this war to go on forever, because the UN has got so much interest. Just the humanitarian money that is sloshed about, and they take advantage. Do you know how many hundreds of superly high-paid jobs depend on this war, or on the side of the UN and the various agencies and charities they gravitate around? The UN is a corrupt institution. On the Security Council, which has to decide what happens between the self-defense of Israel versus the attacking of Hamas, you have an aggressor nation in Russia who can decide whether the vote goes ahead or not. And then you have China, who's been doing what has been wanted to do for the last 15 years. I mean, how do you expect this to ever be solved on a diplomatic way? It's just impossible.
I think the good thing that the Israeli ambassador did is he opened by stressing the fact that what the concept of ceasefire meant, which sounded exactly like the way we would approach it on this channel, and have done so. And the fact that he's talking about that, a ceasefire does nothing for the hostages, does nothing to stop Hamas, does nothing to stop the genocidal ambitions of Hamas or any of the other Hezbollah, or any of the other bodies that exist now would pop up in its place if you don't eradicate the problem. And his strongest line was towards the end, when it is following on from what Marco was just saying there, where he was talking about the standing of the UN itself and its failure to condemn terrorism will go down in history as as marking its demise because it's such a clear point, and the fact that Abbas hasn't come out against October the 7th, and that the UN hasn't included in its resolutions condemnation for October the 7th. It speaks volumes, but the focus is always on this concept ceasefire.
Yes, it's an interesting. I hadn't thought about this till now. It'd be interesting it's interesting to think about if a ceasefire were passed, and let's say it was a temporary ceasefire for a while, and the premise was that then Hamas would release the hostages. If they didn't do it, would the advocates of ceasefire suddenly think, okay, it's justified now for Israel to go in? I suspect not, and I suspect there is basically no grounds upon which you could actually convince them of that. I guess. Let's just do the super chat since we're coming to the final 10 minutes in a second. So we have $9.99 from Jean Walters. Thank you so much, Jean. $2.99 from Marilyn, and $4.99 on top of that from Marilyn as well, who said, I always enjoy your thoughtful and articulate analysis and commentary. Thank you. That's very sweet of you, Marilyn. And $2.99 from Jonathan. So thank you so much. Anything else to say about Rafah or the vote or any other angles you think we haven't covered, guys?
Well, yeah, I just like to add that some of the behavior of some of the countries is purely self-interest motivated. For example, France had to vote in favor of the Algerian proposal because France is getting lots and lots of gas from Algeria in order to backfill the lacking supply from the Russia side. So you have all these little games that now are being played, and I suspect that was part of France's payment in order to get the gas from Algeria. And then we see also the Prince of Wales comment. I mean, they don't talk randomly, these guys. The monarchy here in Britain counts for nothing. They haven't got any real official power. They are just spokespeople for the government. So to me, it just suggests that the government is preparing to push David Cameron's idiotic stance of a state of Palestine or two-state solution, and they're just gearing up the whole offices of the state towards this direction. It's all just politics, really. Nobody really cares about finishing the conflicts once and for all. They're just trying to make the best out of this crisis.
And I think it's Biden's position in the US, which is interesting. The fact they're proposing their own resolution, and that Biden is beginning to shift away from Netanyahu more overtly than before. I mean, it was always there, but it's just becoming more stark. I have my own opinions as to why that might be, and it's not my view is that he won't be the Democratic candidate come November anyway. And at this point, he can be the one that takes the flak. He can do the transition to a less Israeli compliant policy by speaking up, and that's the extent to which he's complicit with the words that come out of his own mouth, which is debatable.
Just the way the draft resolution was reported, and somebody says the draft begins with condemnation of October the 7th. It's like, yeah, let's do this bit. Let's get it out of the way, and now we can go out to business. That's the kind of sentiment that comes across. It's just, yeah, this Israel annoyance here, but we want to deal our own way. So it's just...
Jonathan, anything else final to say about Rafah or the UN vote or any of this?
I think the UN issue speaks volumes on how much the world isn't that different from the way it was in the 1940s and 30s, and the fact that the Allies deliberately did not bomb the camps in the Holocaust during the Holocaust. It's not that different kind of attitude. It's kind of an attitude of indifference, an attitude of we may pay some lip service to, oh yeah, it's terrible, October 7th, and then other topics of more interest, the Gazans suffering, all of that. And I think it's good. It's a good lesson, I think, for me personally, and for a lot of Israelis, about how important that it is that we have Israel right now. Because if we wouldn't have Israel, I don't know where we would have been. So that's the perspective that I'm taking personally. and I think many others. Just beware of the world, beware of Europe, be aware of America, which it has a lot of dangers because it can go down a tribalistic, collectivistic route for the Jewish people instead of advancing forward as a Western advanced society. It can go backwards because of that. The religious elements could gain more power. The fundamentalist, the more nationalistic elements could gain more power, and I think they will after this war. So there's a lot of dangers, but it's just it's a terrible situation we're in. So that's my thought. Not very optimistic, but these are my thoughts for now.
No, well, look, fair enough. I mean, accuracy is always better than optimism when there's no basis for it. We have another super chat from Douglas Lindsay for $20. Thank you, Douglas, who says, Bibi's son should be on the front lines in Gaza with his brothers and sisters in the IDF instead of partying it up in FL in Florida, I guess, with his buddies. It seems Israel has our version of Hunter Biden. Do you agree, Jonathan?
Well, I wouldn't put it like that, but yes, obviously, there's a lot of problematic behavior, I would say, with Mr. Yair Netanyahu. Is crazy. He's buying a lot of crazy conspiracy theories. He's spreading a lot of hate. Just is not very helpful to the war effort. And he's just sitting in Florida. He's not very. He leans towards the conservative, the national conservative movement, the more the worst elements in Israeli right. So I agree he's a very negative figure, but is relevant also. The grand scheme of things, Netanyahu is proven to be the least bad leader we could have right now. If it would have been Gantz, it would have been hostages first, right? Gantz wants hostages first. So if we can cut a deal, we cut a deal. If it were Lapid, it would be release them now at all costs. So whatever Hamas asks, we release everybody, all the Hamas terrorists. So that would also be bad. So in that perspective, Netanyahu, as corrupt as he might be, this allegation have not been proven yet in court, but as bad as he might be, and his terrible track record, we have been talking about it a lot on all of his crimes against Israel, his 16 years rules that have led up to October 7th. All of that is true and valid, but the fact is that so far we are progressing. So far we are on the way to Rafah. So I have to give credit where credit is due. And the allegation of his son in Florida, it's not that interesting. I think there are much more important topics that we need to be focused on. Yeah, I guess it's corrupt. I guess it's something bad there, but it's not that important right now. What's important is we go to Rafah, we conquer Rafah, we release the hostages. That's what's important.
Mm. And then, Jonathan, so you were talking about the momentum of Israeli politics. And so do you think it's the right comparison for Western politics in general, in the sense that people feel generally caught between a rock and a hard place? So you've got Trump on the one hand, or you have Biden on the other. It's not exactly like a good choice. Or in 2016, you've got Clinton on the one hand, you have Trump on the other. In the UK, we have the Conservatives who need to be thrown out, but then you've got Labour on the other hand, and so on. And do you feel like you've got the kind of religious right gaining momentum, perhaps, but then you've got the opposition who want to cut a ceasefire? Does it feel the same kind of way?
It's not as bad. It's not as nearly as bad, because I think even the worst. Look, the people in the kibbutzes, they were hard leftists, and a lot of them sobered up. A lot of them realized that we cannot have peace. We cannot, do what they asked, a two-state solution. So I don't think it'll be as bad. I don't think you'll have properly suicidal parties in Israel. Not after October 7th. I don't think they will gain any power at all. But it's true that Lapid is terrible. What he's proposing is the destruction of Israel. This is what he's proposing. So in that sense, yeah, there's a lot of danger. And from the other end, I see how the radical Jewish fundamentalists, I would say, they would rise. But they might have good policies on Gaza, so we might have to support them and not people who want to surrender. So there is a lot of bad elements in Israeli politics, not denying that, absolutely. But it's not as bad as the West. It cannot be, because we are fighting for our own lives. The West it's abstract. We are here. Gaza is for how far is it from where I'm sitting? It's like 100 kilometers south, even less. So it cannot be the same.
Yes, I always end up hoping that where we get into a situation like I imagined earlier, where we're in a justified war with a Muslim majority or Arab nation or something, that people in Britain would it would be less abstract, and so they would be more sensible about that than they are about Israel. But I'm not going to hold my breath per se. Any final words, guys? We've only got a few minutes left. Anything left to comment on quickly, or should we wrap up?
Well, I mean, just a final word on how pathetic it is that the UK chooses to abstain. We're better than France, but marginally, and it's depressing. It's depressing. I think the UK ambassador said simply calling for a ceasefire, as this resolution does, will not make it happen. But that, yeah, fine, but hardly, rallying staff, is it?
No, and what a shameful place to be in for Britain to be only marginally better than France. How terrible. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Jonathan, where can people find you and your writing?
You can find me on my Substack, Philosophy I Need It. There's an exciting post coming up on the art of Vermeer, so stay tuned for that. You can find it on the description.
Very good. And Mark and Richard, you guys take care of everything on Briefly Objective, right? So people can find your work on there. There was a video that came out yesterday, I think, was it, which was James Valiant on cultural comparison between the Palestinians and the Nazis. Is that right?
Yeah, yep. Everybody should check out that and all the other videos. A great way of showing support for us for this channel, which is the sister channel of this one, is to subscribe to that. We're trying to get over 500 subscribers there. We only need sort of 9 or 10 more to get to that point, and we just want to see a lot of people watching and sharing those videos more.
Yeah. Fantastic. And at 7 p.m. UK time, we've got the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. There's a link for that in the chat and in the description. So if you sign up now, you might even be able to join just in time. And my Substack will be in the description as well. I keep half writing articles and then mothballing them, either because they kind of go out the news or because I see someone else has already stolen the idea. So I'm sorry I haven't been posting very much recently, but I will be again soon. But all right, everyone, the reality show will be back tomorrow, and we'll see you all then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.